Have you ever met a grown man who seems capable, intelligent, and even charming until life asks him to do something uncomfortable? He may hold a job, pay for entertainment, make plans with friends, and speak confidently about what he wants from the future. Yet the moment responsibility becomes repetitive, emotionally demanding, or inconvenient, someone else somehow ends up carrying it for him. His partner reminds him about appointments, his mother solves problems he created, and his coworkers quietly finish the tasks he avoided. From the outside, this can look like laziness, selfishness, or a simple refusal to grow up. But the psychology of the man-child is usually more complicated than a grown man who merely enjoys being taken care of. It is often a pattern built from avoidance, emotional underdevelopment, learned dependency, and an identity that has never been forced to mature. Today, I want to break that pattern down, because a man-child is not defined by hobbies, humor, video games, or youthful energy. He is defined by what happens when adult life requires accountability, emotional regulation, sacrifice, and consistent follow-through. If you have ever loved someone who promised change but repeatedly handed the consequences of his choices back to you, this may explain why the relationship felt so exhausting. Let us begin with something important, because emotional adulthood is not the same thing as physical age. A person can grow older while continuing to use the coping strategies that once protected him as a child. He may learn how to appear independent in public while remaining deeply dependent in private. He may know how to earn money without knowing how to manage frustration, repair conflict, or take responsibility without being pushed. This is why the man-child can be confusing, because his competence often appears only in areas that reward him quickly. He can spend hours mastering a game, researching a purchase, or planning a trip because those activities give him interest, pleasure, and control. Yet he forgets the bill, ignores the laundry, avoids the difficult conversation, and acts surprised when someone becomes angry. The difference is not always ability, because the difference is often emotional reward. Tasks that feel exciting confirm his freedom, while tasks that feel repetitive remind him that adulthood comes with limits. Somewhere along the way, he may have learned that discomfort is something other people should remove for him. Perhaps a parent rescued him whenever consequences appeared, or perhaps another adult always stepped in before failure could teach him anything. He may have been protected from embarrassment, responsibility, disappointment, and the ordinary frustration of having to finish what he started. At the time, that protection may have looked like love, but over time, it prevented him from developing psychological muscle. A child gains confidence by discovering that he can survive discomfort, correct mistakes, and recover after getting things wrong. When those experiences are repeatedly taken away, the child may grow into a man who experiences ordinary demands as unfair pressure. This is where learned helplessness can quietly enter the picture, although it may not look helpless from the outside. He may insist that he is bad at cooking, terrible with schedules, confused by cleaning, or naturally incapable of remembering important details. Yet these claims often disappear when the task is connected to something he personally values. He can remember the release date of a game, the statistics of a team, or the exact specifications of a device he wants to buy. What he cannot seem to remember are the responsibilities whose neglect will eventually be absorbed by someone else. This is sometimes called weaponized incompetence, but not every example is consciously planned or deliberately manipulative. In many cases, the pattern has become so automatic that he genuinely experiences dependence as part of his personality. He tells himself that other people are simply better at those things, which allows him to avoid the shame of admitting that he never practiced. Every time someone takes over, his belief in his own incapability becomes stronger, and every escaped consequence teaches his nervous system that avoidance works. The result is a strange cycle in which the people around him become more competent, while he becomes increasingly passive. His partner starts reminding, organizing, anticipating, and correcting because otherwise the household begins to fall apart. He then experiences her management as criticism, even though her management grew out of his repeated absence. This creates one of the most painful dynamics in relationships with a man-child. The romantic partner slowly becomes the responsible parent, while the man begins reacting like a controlled teenager. She asks him to follow through, and he hears that she is trying to dominate him. She expresses exhaustion, and he hears that nothing he does is ever good enough. She stops trusting his promises, and he focuses on her tone instead of the history that created her distrust. This defensive shift protects him from confronting the real issue, because discussing her delivery feels easier than discussing his pattern. Psychologists sometimes describe this as externalization, which means placing the source of discomfort outside oneself. Instead of asking why he failed to act, he asks why everyone is making such a big deal about it. Instead of considering the effect of his behavior, he explains why his intentions should excuse the outcome. Instead of repairing the damage, he argues that he never meant for anyone to feel hurt. Intentions become his shelter, because consequences require a level of ownership he has not learned to tolerate. This is also why apologies from a man-child can feel strangely incomplete. He may say that he is sorry you feel that way, sorry things became complicated, or sorry the conversation turned into an argument. What he often avoids saying is that he made a choice, that the choice affected you, and that repairing it is now his responsibility. A mature apology threatens neither identity nor dignity, because a mature person understands that making a mistake does not make him worthless. For the man-child, however, admitting fault may feel like total defeat because his self-esteem is often more fragile than his confidence suggests. He may appear arrogant precisely because he cannot tolerate the feeling of being inadequate. He may joke, deflect, become angry, withdraw, or suddenly list everything you have ever done wrong. These reactions are not signs of strength because they are methods of escaping emotional exposure. The deeper fear is often that if he admits one failure, the entire image he has built of himself will collapse. So he protects the image rather than improving the person behind it. Another important part of this psychology is the relationship between freedom and responsibility. The man-child often imagines freedom as the absence of obligation, rather than the ability to choose and carry the consequences of that choice. He wants the privileges of adulthood without the structure that makes those privileges sustainable. He wants intimacy without emotional labor, a comfortable home without maintenance, and loyalty without consistent reliability. He may speak passionately about independence while depending on women to organize the practical and emotional parts of his life. This contradiction often remains invisible to him, because dependency does not feel like dependency when someone else performs it quietly. The meal appears, the plans are remembered, the conflict is repaired, and the forgotten task somehow gets completed. Over time, he begins to experience this invisible labor as the natural background of his life. When that labor stops, he may accuse the other person of changing rather than recognizing how much she was carrying. This is why boundaries often produce anger in someone who has benefited from weak boundaries. The boundary does not create the problem, because it reveals the arrangement that had been protecting him from the problem. For the first time, the consequence remains attached to the person who created it, which can feel cruel to someone who has mistaken rescue for love. He may say that a caring partner would help him, remind him, forgive him, or give him another chance. But support and substitution are not the same thing, because one develops responsibility while the other quietly removes it. Support helps a person face responsibility, while substitution removes responsibility and transfers it to someone else. A relationship becomes unhealthy when one adult must repeatedly become smaller, stronger, quieter, and more organized so the other adult can remain unchanged. Eventually, resentment grows because attraction struggles to survive where parenting has replaced partnership. The responsible partner may begin to feel guilty for losing respect, even though respect cannot be maintained through promises alone. Respect grows from evidence, and repeated behavior is the evidence the nervous system believes. This is why change cannot begin with another emotional speech, another temporary burst of effort, or another promise made during a crisis. The man-child does not primarily need stronger intentions, because he needs a different relationship with discomfort. He must learn to complete tasks when nobody praises him, repair harm without being chased, and tolerate frustration without making it someone else's emergency. He must stop asking whether he feels like acting, and start asking what the situation requires from him. That transition can feel deeply uncomfortable, because it removes the fantasy that adulthood should always feel natural. Many mature behaviors feel awkward before they become stable parts of a person's identity. Accountability feels threatening before it becomes stabilizing, and consistency feels restrictive before it begins to create genuine freedom. The good news is that emotional immaturity is a pattern that can change, rather than a permanent destiny written into someone's personality. A man can learn to notice avoidance before it becomes another excuse that someone else must eventually manage. He can practice doing ordinary tasks badly until repetition makes him capable of doing them well. He can replace defensive explanations with genuine curiosity about the effect his actions have on other people. He can begin measuring himself by what he follows through on rather than what he claims he intended to do. But this growth requires something that no partner, parent, therapist, or friend can manufacture on his behalf. He must become more committed to reality than he is attached to comfort. The turning point arrives when he stops seeing responsibility as punishment and begins seeing it as evidence that his life belongs to him. That is when cleaning his own mess no longer feels like humiliation, because it begins to feel like authorship. That is when an apology no longer feels like surrender, because it becomes a way to protect trust. That is when routine no longer feels like a prison, because it becomes the structure that keeps his life from collapsing. The psychology of the man-child is therefore not really about childish interests, playful behavior, or refusing to become overly serious. It is about a person whose emotional development stopped wherever other people began absorbing the cost of his avoidance. And the path forward is not shame, ridicule, or another person working harder to save him, but responsibility, repeated often enough to build an adult identity from his own evidence. If this pattern feels familiar, the most useful question is not whether he has potential, because many people have potential. The more important question is whether his daily choices are turning that potential into a person who can genuinely be trusted.